Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. It has been a manic week for me. I started off here for a conference on Monday, and I've ended up here to catch up with some friends on Sunday. And in between, I've managed to spend a little bit of time in here, back to normal. But it's been a fantastic week to sit down and watch the far right go into an absolute meltdown. They have not had a good week at all, and it's been glorious to sit down and watch. And it's given me a little bit of fodder for the next paid membership video called Mailbag. I don't know if you're aware of it yet. I go through and have a look at some of the comments that the filters have decided to block from public view because they are a little bit out there sometimes. And if you're a paid member, you can check that out. But yeah, there's been some fascinating stuff happening this week, and you can catch up all of it on the Omnibus that you're about to sit down and watch. Don't forget though, before you hit that play button, make sure you hit that like button on the video or subscribe to the channel, or feel free to share the video so other people can revel in the weirdness that this week has brought. All right, let's jump into the Omnibus edition. Hello there, kia ora. Earlier this week, this was me. Now, I know you're probably sitting there thinking, how on earth did Paul get trapped inside Parliament like some kind of political version of Severance? It's a long, strange story, and for that we kind of need to rewind a few days. It actually started on Sunday with daylight saving time kicking in, thanks to a goddamn shift-working bug collector who wanted more time to look at his butterflies. This is George Hudson, the dude who suggested daylight saving time, the first one in the world, apparently, to ever see it rolled out. He's also one of the most prolific entomologists, which is the bug people, in the history of the country, having collected the largest ever collection of native bugs, which are now part of the collection at Te Papa. Anyway, that day I was working with a client at an event here in Tamaki where I ran into some politicians, like these two, and this lot, and this group, which were hunting for a gecko that made them jump. It was kind of weirdly adorable. Now, this is a paid gig where I needed to be apolitical. It's written into the rules for me being there before anyone asks why I didn't use the opportunity to have words, which is a really hard thing to do sometimes when the local National Party MP turns around and says, well, for me, it's not about left and right, it's about right and wrong. And to be fair, the rest of the day was absolutely massive. There was something like 25,000 steps left over on my counter on my watch over 3 sports fields. It was huge. And then the next morning I was up at 3:30 a.m. to catch a 6 a.m. flight to Wellington for Monday's conference that they had down there on the future potential government regulation on artificial intelligence. All morning, I heard in meetings that I had and in Uber drives that I caught about how much firing nearly 10,000 public servants had crashed the CBD economy, and forcing staff to work from the office hadn't mitigated that. One driver actually told me that the fastest growing group that he was giving rides to was young people moving overseas needing to go to the airport because they didn't have any civil service work left. He had counted 110 people in March. And then before the conference, I actually recorded this. Let's jump over to the video I planned to put out.
Hello there, kia ora. I'm standing in front of a building that last week released some historic information. The 300 plus thousand submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill is a new record. And the amount of overwhelming feedback, 90% of those responses and returns, was against the bill itself. And that in itself is absolutely fascinating. Now, there was always going to be some specific outcomes that came from this. Like, ACT was always going to turn around and go, yeah, well, these things aren't representative of the public all the time, because that's something that they tried to lay the seeds for before all this happened. On top of that, there's still a whole bunch of them, including David Seymour himself, who are pushing to continue with the referendum, because what have you got to be scared of? The reality is, there is nothing to be scared of. We've seen quite clearly how the country feels about this. But this bill in itself, along with a whole bunch of other little things like the removal of Maori wards, forcing that into a referendum, getting rid of things like the Maori Health Authority, all of these attacks on Maoridom, they are something that this party, ACT in particular, revel in, as well as their proxies like Hobson's Pledge or NZCPR. And by allowing this to continue, by saying, well, a referendum, you know what the outcome is going to be. It's not about the outcome. It's about making sure that they get another 6, 12, 18 months to spread racist bullshit everywhere. That's what the aim here is. It's not about making sure everybody is equal under the law, because that's already there. Under the law, there's equality. The actual outcomes are not equal, though. And that's the problem. And that's something that they're never going to say. But if they can spend 18 months sitting there whipping up racist foment, that's a win for the people who are more worried about property rights than about historical injustices and inequitable results between different parts of the country. So yeah, it's actually kind of weird being here on what seems to be a relatively quiet day. There's very little going on. But something historic did happen here, and some arsehole is going to try and steal it and make sure that you think it's all about him, when really it's all about telling him to fuck off.
Right, so after that, I then bumped into Labour's Chief Whip, Glenn Bennett, who invited me out for a coffee after bumping into him on the forecourt, where we talked about left-leaning media, while Jenna Lynch and her ACT Party secretary husband grabbed coffee 2 tables over. She seemed lovely. Then, after the conference, because half the doors were locked by the time we finished, I ended up somehow wandering around the halls of Parliament briefly, trying to escape. And eventually I did, when I got surrounded by a whole heap of people in military uniforms for an announcement on increased military funding. Before I then bumped into Lester Levy, the former commissioner for the New Zealand Health Services. And then I walked out and found a giant billboard paid for by the so-called Sensible Sentencing Trust using a copywritten image of Tamitha Paul, looking kind of cool with this weird US slogan about the police. And then my phone blew up with messages because I had Do Not Disturb on most of the time that I was in Parliament. I found out that Shane Jones's wife apparently had been assaulted at an airport, that to hit our net zero requirements that the government's going to need to plant 280,000 hectares of trees, that the share market had been hit by Trump's tariffs, that there would be a Labour resignation sometime in the next 24 hours, a Labour Party member announcing a potential mayoral candidacy run for Wellington, and a new poll was supposed to be coming out that night. It's a lot to take on, and on top of that, I missed the biggest spectacle in Wellington on Monday. A man folding a fitted sheet. And then that was just yesterday. Today, there was a lot of other crap that kind of happened, like, the Prime Minister announcing that he wasn't, again, going to be in Parliament for a vote that's important to Māori. Hopefully the death knell of the Treaty Principles Bill. But he wasn't there for the first reading. He didn't go out and talk to people when the hikoi showed up. He seems to be mysteriously absent whenever anything like that crops up. Today, Karen Shower was also called out for her race baiting over comments on school lunches. New research from the Helen Clark Foundation showing that our social cohesion is at the worst it's ever been. Nicola Willis trying to keep everyone calm with an office address to try and say that if they can't achieve what they promised financially, it was now the fault of the world economy and not their plan failing all along, which they refuse to adjust just because there's, the latest in a long line of once-in-a-long-time financial crises. While the Prime Minister then went into solemn leadership mode that we expect in times of natural disaster when life has been lost over how his and his donors' stock portfolios are doing. And the revelation of a Christchurch National Party MP who is part of a secretive cult with links to historic sexual abuse cases. The cult, that is, not the MP, who denies any knowledge of any of the issues. And being a member, past or present, of a cult with a history of known abuse of young people isn't actually a disqualifier for being an MP. Otherwise, Ryan Hamilton would be out being, a former member of the Destiny Church, and Tanya Unkovich would be gone for claiming that God spoke to her to go to Parliament to find out what's in people's pants before they go into the bathroom. Oh, and somehow, this year I managed to work with 3 nominees in the 2025 Aotearoa Music Awards. So over the last 3 days, my world has been stupid busy. And today it was mostly fighting a headache and getting feeling back in my feet while I try and get my head around all of the everything that 3 days has thrown at us. Because every day at the moment feels like a bit of an onslaught. There's a million things being thrown at us all the time, and it's impossible to process them all for anybody, any individual. Some of what we're seeing is reactive, some of it's planned, and all of it together is overwhelming. Which makes it really hard to work out what goes into a video that I have to sit down and start with, "Hello there, kia ora. Hello there, kia ora. It's time to break out the violins, but, make them tiny and out of tune. because it's been a really tough few days for the alt-right, and it's just going to get much, much worse today. On top of research that came out with multiple stories this week about the gendered abuse that female politicians receive in this country from central and local government, well, showing that it mostly comes from men who are compensating for their shortcomings, yesterday we saw two alt-right trolls get unmasked. The one that went under the radar a little bit was actually around the Sensible Sentencing Trust billboards that showed up last week of Tamitha Paul and Chloe Schwarbrick, where it turns out that the authorization statement that are on the billboards themselves, well, they match another organization that's totally not going to surprise anyone. Now, they have to have these statements on there because they're technically considered electoral advertising. And that address? Well, it shares an address with the home of astroturfing in this country, the groups behind the Free Speech Union or the Taxpayers Union. It's an organization known as the Campaign Company. It's Jordan Williams' Campaign Company. It's their address that's on this particular billboard. Now, the Campaign Company has actually been described by one research group as having a client list that reads like an Atlas Network membership list, and they were behind Hobson's Pledges, foreshore campaign that they ran last year in the Herald on the wraparound. They got all the complaints, and then the Herald were like, yeah, this time we're not going to take your racist money. That was them. They did that. The other unmasked right-winger was an anonymous Twitter troll who goes by the name Holy Heka Tui Teka, whose selective screen grabs and baseless accusations against Green MP Benjamin Doyle has led to death threats against Doyle and their family from the alt-right, who claim cancel culture is bad. Unless it's, the imported type of culture wars that they can use to vilify trans and non-binary people. It turns out this dude is a Taranaki businessman named Rhys Williams, not to be confused with the Rhys Williams who does work with the New Plymouth District Council. This is the Rhys Williams who last year was behind the Inflection Point event, an anti-trans hate parade that was put on in Wellington. The one where New Zealand First Tanya Unkovich told the audience that God told her to see what's in your underpants before you take a leak. Williams claimed online that he and the Landy sisters had helped New Zealand First form policy around what he considered an issue. And one of those sisters was the one that was banned from the Otaki New World for harassing a trans staff member. Well, the Post and stuff outed Williams today based on some extensive sleuthing work and revealed to the wider public some of his most vile Twitter posts and responses, which he's now unironically complaining about how things were cherry-picked from his account to make him look bad. And the worst people in the country are backing him up over this, because of course they are. And all this shows why we need to teach people the difference between hate speech and free speech, and take a look at how a lack of education and legislation in the area can cause significant harm and lead to significant societal issues. And all week, the far right have been screaming that deleting posts that have selectively chosen to misrepresent information to justify death threats and spread bigotry being deleted are a sign of guilt, unless you get an op-ed in the Herald. And now, for some reason, a lot of their posts have been deleted. It does raise a question of what they were saying about guilt, though, doesn't it? I wonder if there's any awkward clips of, say, a far-right politician going on about how deleting things might make somebody look guilty.
Worse than that, of course, you've got all these other postings, 52 of which he's pulled down. And he hasn't pulled them down because they are posts of innocence. He's pulled them down because they are posts which fall into very question the reason why he's in Parliament, and it can only be to massively corrode ethical standards in our society. Well, let me ask you this question. Why would you pull 52 posts if they were respectable?
Oh, that's awkward. I wonder if there's any sort of damage control from Peters. Oh yeah, of course there is. This Facebook message he put out last night. And all of this on the eve of what should be a massive fuck you to the alt-right today as the Treaty Principles Bill gets its second and hopefully final reading in the House. Now, yet again, the Prime Minister isn't going to be there, while Chris Hipkins has rearranged his schedule to make sure that he can be there for the vote. And it's the day we get to see if Luxon is a man of his word and his team, his caucus, are going to listen to him, and the bill proceeds no further after the Select Committee called for it to be tossed onto the waste pile of history, and it was revealed that only 8% of submitters supported the bill. And while the alt-right are whining about what people are so afraid of if we let the referendum go ahead, what they're clearly trying to do is get more time to rake up their alt-right, racist, bigoted talking points. And getting rid of this bill is one very small step in a direction of trying to stop the racist bullshit that this government has inflamed with its raft of anti-Maori policies. So, break out those teeny tiny violins because the loudest, nastiest, most hateful people in the country are having a really shit time of it this week. And the rest of us should all consider that a win. And who doesn't love a celebration with music? Like the kind you get from tiny violins. Hello there, kia ora. Ding dong, the bill is gone. Yesterday was a fascinating one to sit down and watch. David Seymour live tweeted the whole thing with, "Why are people saying mean things about my bill and me when clearly I'm the only one who is right here?" The opposition parties pointed out that this was a waste of time, money, effort, and burned our social cohesion like one of those old-timey cartoon bombs with the little fuses. The National and New Zealand First MPs who spoke, because their leaders weren't there, tried to claim the opposition were using the bill for political point scoring because everyone knew the outcome from the parties who promised to keep the first home buyers grant, add a new tax for apps, promise money in the budget for expanded mental health services to properly fund our health and police and education sectors, and to fund a range of cancer meds in their first budget. So sure, they seem trustworthy. They also tried to pitch that all of their changes that directly impact Māori outcomes, like removing Section 7AA from the Oranga Tamariki Act, getting rid of the Māori Health Authority, forcing councils to hold expensive referenda on Māori wards, New Zealand First plan to remove 28 general treaty clauses from legislation, even changing the names of government departments to English First, which were designed to help those who needed the most help and to be good treaty partners, were actually their way to help Māori because they clearly ceded sovereignty, as Paul Goldsmith said. There was a lot of passion and emotion from those opposing. Hana Rafiti Maipi Clark was on the verge of tears presenting her speech, highlighting a loss of a number of rangatira who had passed during the fight against the bill. There was mention of submissions, which came in from 6% of the population, not 1% like a certain David Seymour was claiming. The largest protest hikoi in the history of the country, the social media campaigns, and the huge select committee response. And Willie Jackson was kicked out for calling Seymour a liar, and a few warnings were given over mentioning the absence of luxon, which is against parliamentary rules. It was also pointed out a number of times that all of this, the $6 million spent on the process, was all down to the Prime Minister allowing it to happen. No matter how much the coalition said it was just how MMP works. But the fact is, Seymour said afterwards it wasn't a bottom line. Luxon said it was presented as a bottom line, which means one of them is lying, which means it's down to the Prime Minister to take responsibility for allowing it to proceed because, well, he was either duped or complicit, and he doesn't care. He said so on Mike Hosking's show. So what happens now? Well, this version of the bill itself is dead and buried, relegated to the history books, but in media stand-ups afterwards, when Seymour bolted as Tūtera Maina Iwi rang around Parliament, he did say that the bill would be back. Like a zombie apocalypse written by Uwe Boll. But there's likely to be a few possible things happen going forward. On the small end of the scale, we can expect to start getting some gaslighting from National and New Zealand First MPs about how they are responsible for killing the bill, especially in front of Māori audiences. And they'll use their line that it was all because of the coalition. In front of more right-leaning audiences, you can expect different language, like when they tell voters that they're against co-governance because they believe in one person, one vote, but won't do anything about getting rid of those people who get to vote twice in local elections because they own properties. There's also a chance that if National and ACT need to renegotiate an agreement for a second term, that it will be reintroduced, and if that's the case, it will very likely be a bottom line this time, especially if New Zealand First isn't needed. There's also a very high possibility that Hobson's pledge will start the process for a citizens-initiated referendum. But this is a complicated process. It requires at least 410,000 signatures from registered voters, which is the number of people who live in Christchurch. Those signatures need to be presented to the Clerk of the House, who then works with officials on the exact wording of the referendum question. The whole process takes about a year, so that'll be starting really soon. And based on the cost of the last referendums, the end of life referendum and the marijuana legalization bill, we're looking at a cost of around $25 to $30 million footed by the taxpayer. And there is a few ways that the public can still push back. Call out any government member who tries to take credit, especially if they are caught code switching between audiences. Keep pushing back on other changes, like the Regulatory Standards Bill, along with other legislative changes that the Coalition were crowing about today that will result in more inequitable outcomes for Māori. If you come across something or someone wanting you to sign a petition for the referendum, either don't sign it or put down some false details. Because if there's enough false details within that form, it doesn't count and won't go forward. And make sure that you vote, right? Vote in this year's local body elections, especially if you have a referendum on Māori wards being forced on you, to send another clear message about how you feel. And next year, make sure you and those around you vote, because if there's a referendum on this at the time, there's going to be so many resources from astroturfing groups with big wallets and tiny amounts of empathy doing what they can to focus the vote to go the way that they want it to. The results of that election will dictate if we see this sort of bullshit again anytime this decade. So it's so important to remember what got us to today and what happened and how it made you feel.
Ding dong, the bill is gone. It's time in the House. Didn't last too long. The Treaty Principles Bill is history, left behind as a legislative mystery. David Seymour looks so sad. The racists too are feeling bad, but their hatred won't gain traction here. We'll stand united, make it clear. No room for their racist tale. We'll make sure their attempts fail. Together we'll fight, we won't retreat. Racism will never claim defeat. David Seymour looks so sad. The racists too are feeling bad, but their hatred won't gain traction here. We'll stand united, make it clear. No room for the racist tale. We'll make sure their attempts fail. Together we'll fight, we won't retreat. Racism will never claim defeat.
Hey, thanks for checking out. Hello there, kia ora. I'm Paul, and this is this week's The News. On Thursday, MPs voted down the controversial and divisive Treaty Principles Bill 112 to 11 votes after a long debate session which included touching recognition of those who had passed away who had been fighting the bill, references to a number of the record-breaking amount of submissions, the largest ever protest in the country's history, and a list of reasons why the government is still anti-Maori, but this was a step too far. Said a member of the press gallery, "Thank God we can finally stop platforming David Seymour every 5 minutes. If we want to. Not that we want to, but we totally could." The Green Party has apologised after a staffer accidentally dropped a vape pen from above the tiles of Parliament onto a press stand-up with David Seymour, seen here wondering if that's Guy Fawkes walking into the wrong government building. Sorry, totally just a joke. Before this week's Treaty Principles vote, said a spokesperson for the ACT Party, "The sky is clearly falling and we're the only party who can see it." Te Whatu Ora cost cutting continues, with the Eye of Sauron now falling on areas of the organisation that bring in millions of dollars to our health sector, the team dedicated to hunting down underpayments and fraud. Said Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here cosplaying as a life-size accurate dozer from Fraggle Rock, "Cutting off our nose to spite our face can be easily fixed by our hard-working medical staff, if we don't mind waiting up to a month to see an ED specialist." After 2 weeks of harassing Green MP Benjamin Doyle based on information the Deputy Prime Minister found on Twitter in a late-night doom scroll, Winston Peters, seen here wondering if that's vodka or gin, has refused to have a one-on-one meeting with Doyle. Said Peters, "The bar is just opened, so I really don't have time to sit down and have an adult conversation right now. It's always easier to vilify someone from a distance after all." Questions have been raised about Elam MP Hamish Campbell, seen here trying on human skin for the first time, about his membership of a secretive religious sect known as the 2x2s, which is being investigated by the FBI over sexual abuse cases. Hamish was confronted by news media over the association, which he downplayed with textbook examples of how people in sects are told to downplay things when they're caught by the media. Said Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here in Parliament during the final reading of the Treaty Principles Bill, which he allowed to move through the expensive process. What I'm saying to you is National has a really strong vetting process, as you can see with the team we have now. Like former Destiny Church member Ryan Hamilton, admitted bed leg beater Sam Uffindale, wife and mother of animal abusers Barbara Kuriger, our new Justice Committee chair Andrew Bailey, and the star of Nikki Hagar's Dirty Politics Judith Collins. So I'm sure there's no need for concern. An advisory group has warned Associate Justice Minister Casey Costello, seen here waiting to see if the vape dropped on David Seymour was from one of her lobbyist friends in the tobacco industry, on how the country is losing the battle against organised crime. Said Costello of the report, organised crime tends to be coordinated from overseas, but it's New Zealanders that end up paying the price. It's a model we understand really well in New Zealand first, since that's how our party leader approaches his talking points when he starts using US culture war bullshit to scare our voting base. E. coli is being discovered in the water supply in Palmerston North in low-level quantities. The council says nothing is required of residents with concerns as the water treatment process will take care of it. But also we're wondering if maybe there could have been some kind of water reform that might have happened to stop this from occurring. Oh well, I guess we'll never know. Tauranga Mayor Mahi Drysdale, seen here wondering where the nearest rowing track is, has come under fire for voting for the sale of a local marine precinct in a closed-doors meeting despite publicly campaigning against the sale. Minutes of the meeting revealed the vote results after being released on request from local MP Sam Uffindale. Said a spokesperson for Drysdale, he just figured that since he lives in Cambridge, he'd never really be impacted by the vote. Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown, seen here demonstrating what is colloquially known as Boomer Zoom, has come under fire for calling into a committee meeting with a video call while driving. Road safety campaigners have called the act dangerous, while the mayor, who campaigned on cutting wasteful spending, has said it's just another reason why he needs a limo, like government MPs. A NASA balloon the size of a rugby field was launched from Wanaka on Thursday to help take measurements of the planet's ionosphere, as well as other weather data. Said a spokesperson for the local chapter of Voices for Freedom, it's a Chinese spy balloon with a new variant of the fake disease that doesn't exist. I mean, clearly. And it was brought over here by that Italian army that were going to invade when the COVID hit. Not that COVID existed. You see, we were right the whole time. A large-scale longitudinal report from Otago University has highlighted the high rates of gendered abuse female MPs and politicians get in this country, with some respondents pointing out this abuse as part of the reason some of them have chosen to withdraw from public service. Said a spokesperson for Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, this report is really concerning. We had no idea so many of our voters were this active on social media. KiwiSaver accounts have been in a state of flux this week as international markets have seesawed after Donald Trump's instigation, then pause of wholesale tariffs. The Prime Minister has told people not to panic though because he feels the country is well positioned to weather the tariff storm. Look, what I'm saying to you is you should just be wealthy and sorted like me. Then the whims of a perfectly lovely, very stable genius halfway around the world won't impact you quite so much. A new report released this morning shows more children this year are living in material hardship than last year. The report cited a 0.9% increase in measurable markers over the last year, which the report authors said were exacerbated by the ongoing cost of living crisis. Said Child Poverty Reduction Minister Louise Upston, seen here inviting you to take part in the aversion therapy they gave Malcolm McDowell in A Clockwork Orange, don't worry, we'll just change the targets again so it looks like we're succeeding. And finally, TVNZ has announced a short-run order of a New Zealand version of the hit game show The Chase. To be filmed in Australia on the Australian version sets and with their chasers, the process of finding both contestants and a host will begin soon. I'm not saying I wouldn't take the hosting gig if someone was to offer it. Said the show's producers, it's an opportunity for Kiwis to finally show that they are smarter than their Aussie neighbours, because we've had our doubts lately based on who they voted for. Right, that's this week's The News. Thanks again for supporting, and we'll see you all next week. Hey, thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus edition. It's been a good one to sit back and watch the far right kind of eat each other a little bit, and it was always to be expected because that's always going to happen with groups that are more interested in how they deal with themselves than helping other people. Them's the breaks, I guess. As I said at the start of the video, don't forget to hit that like button, share button, or subscribe button. All of them work, I guess. And if you want to become a paid YouTube member so you can access some of that content, you're more than welcome to. There's a little button now that I think says membership or join or something like that. I don't know. I don't pay huge amounts of attention to what the buttons say down there. I probably should. Anyway, until next time, look after yourself, live long, prosper, be one with the Force, and I'll catch you guys all next week. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.